For most adults,
Yep.
life is a burden. And to have that level of joy, of contentment, of excitement is pretty rare. And it's because we as adults have taken on all these burdens of the world as we've grown up and realize, oh man, like I gotta do all this stuff, I gotta be successful, I gotta grow businesses. And we get fixated on these things and we take on more and more of the world and it becomes more and more of a burden.
So here's something I've been thinking about. When you're starting a business, there's no confusion about your purpose. It's to make money, create stability, and take care of your family. But then one day you kind of get there. You've created that stability, you've created that foundation, and suddenly the thing that was pushing you forward, it disappears. And that's what we're figuring out here on the other side of enough. I'm sitting down with entrepreneurs who have hit their goals, but they're still searching for something more. We're talking about what business excellence really looks like on the other side. Let's get into it.
How
Hey,
you
yo.
doing?
I've been looking forward to this interview.
Yeah, me too. I've got that same heater AC unit blowing on me right now. Yeah.
Oh, really? This
Here's
Iris
my remote.
Oyama.
Maybe a different make.
Nice. A little different. I'm trying to get this thing to stop blowing on me. Because it's like a troll from Lord of the Rings breathing its hot breath onto you. But if I turn it off, if I turn it off, it'll be all freezing. It's probably low 40s here, which isn't bad, but these structures are not insulated at all. I mean, it's like wood put together. So it's, you pretty much have to have the heater running constantly. I do wonder, because you and I are in real estate, I mean, how much money, wouldn't it just be cheaper to put in insulation instead of spending 20 years like overheating a house over and over again? I don't know.
I would think so too. It's a good question. Maybe it's just part of tradition, Japanese tradition.
Yep. Well, today we went to an onsen. Did I send you a photo?
Yeah.
I did. I walked
That's the
around
Jimjo name?
naked in a dress. Yep. I was naked in a dress holding a purse and loved every moment of
Nice.
it. So I would say a Korean spa, you first go to the bathhouse, then you put on the prison uniform type thing, and then you go to the mixed gender area. With the Japanese one, it was kind of reverse, where you first put on your uniform, which makes you look like a samurai, and then you can kind of go wherever you want. You can go eat or whatever. And the bathhouse is like totally optional. It's not a funnel to the rest of the building. So definitely different. The exchange right here, as you know, is really good. So we were at like the nicest, I imagine it's the nicest one in the city. And it was $15 per adult
Awesome.
for like an all day thing.
Did they have
Yeah.
the old masseuse included in the package as well?
What old
You
masseuse?
didn't get that in the Korean Jimjo bongs?
Oh, yeah. Like the naked guy who's wearing, he's either naked or wearing shorts.
Yeah.
So that's a body scrub. My wife got it and her friend got it. And they said, what did they say? It was 4,000 yen, which is $25, which is good. In the States, it would be 3 times
Yeah.
that.
Awesome.
Yep. I didn't do it, but it was a good experience. It was fun to see my girls all dressed up because, you see your kids you see your kids at the worst moments when they wake up, they've got crazy hair. They look like a feral child in your own house. But when they're all dressed up in like a Japanese spa and those little, are they called kimonos? I should know. But they're all dressed up. They look so cute.
Did they
So maybe I'll post a
did
picture
they
of that
enjoy
later.
the spa? Could they appreciate it?
Oh, they loved it. Yeah, they loved it. I mean, they spent like 3 hours in the different temperature pools.
Very cool.
Well, we're recording, so let's. You and I obviously know each other, and I think we assume that people know our relationship. But Eric, you actually got me into the land business, and before that, you and I were roommates at Fort Bragg. And I actually lived in your house. I moved into your house before you even met me. And I remember somehow we got connected and I texted you and I'm like, hey, my name's Drew. I'm a new lieutenant moving to Fort Bragg. do you have a spare bedroom? And you're like, yep, sounds good to me. And we didn't even talk about rent. We didn't talk about prices. You didn't run my credit. There was nothing. I just moved into an empty bedroom. You were at the captain's career course. And then we met a few months later after I'd been in your house for a few months. And the rest is history. The rest is just a good friendship and comparing stories along the way. Well, let's talk about where you're at. You want to share where you're at currently, physically, geographically?
Geographically, in Iraq, so very different scenery here than Japan or Colorado, which is where I'm normally, and or from North Carolina, which is where we lived together for a while. So yeah, currently out there, just vacationing,
Doing Army officer stuff.
working on my suntan.
Do you want
Yeah, doing Army stuff.
Yep.
What people typically do in Iraq.
Yeah, rebuilding an economy. I love it. Well, thanks for meeting with me. It's 9 p.m. here, 3 p.m. there, I think, right? And, you're a busy guy. I'm a busy guy. So I'm glad our schedules could align. And I've known you now since 2012, so 13 years. That's a long time. For the audience, why don't you kind of talk about your background, focus more on business, and let's just kind of talk about your journey. I know you and I both have had many ups and downs in business, and it's a really hard journey. And I think people need to understand that often we only post or talk about our victories, but business is hard. And if you work at it long enough, you're going to do very well. But there's a lot of valleys on the way to the top. And it's not that you and I are at the top right now, but I think we've both made some good progress. And why don't you kind of talk about some of your journey a little bit?
Well, you're forcing me to cut out the good parts with all the fun stories that we've had at the North Carolina house, but that's okay.
You can share some stories. You just have to. My audience needs to believe that I'm a real adult, so you can't share too much.
I'll go right to the real estate and the business side. That's okay. If anyone does want to know, maybe we can have a sidebar conversation and we can get to know the other side of Drew. But I'll cherish that as a keepsake between you and I for now. So on the business side, the real estate side, yeah, it definitely ups and downs. And I told you this before we started. I'm going to be very open about my faith. So anyone who is not expecting that, I'm just going to give you that warning now, starting now, that really for me, my faith journey is directly intertwined with my real estate / business journey. Really kind of started back when I was in North Carolina. This was before I had that house actually, and before you moved in. So before I had that house, I felt like God was telling me in one of my quiet times, hey, you should go out and buy a house, which I'd never done before. No experience in real estate, no desire for real estate. But I felt like he was saying that in a Bible verse I was reading, and I should have written it down, but I didn't. And I thought that was kind of odd, because I'd never had received that before or anything like that. And so I asked him, hey, if it is you, God, confirm this again in a different passage, different part of the Bible, again tomorrow. And basically, long story short, fast forward the next day, he gives me a different passage, different part of the Bible, and it's something like, go and take possession of the land or something like that. I'm like,
what year would have this been?
This was probably
2009, probably 2010.
Let me think. I got to, so I'm in the military for those who haven't figured that out. And I moved PCS to Fort Bragg at the time at, what year was that? Must have been 2009, I think. Yeah, close to 2009, maybe beginning 2010, thereabouts. So I get what I feel like is a word from the Lord. I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to be obedient and faithful, and I'm going to walk out of this front door. And I literally walked down the road, didn't know anything about real estate, and I saw the first house for sale with a for sale sign, which was about 3 houses down. And I said, okay, well, I guess I'm going to buy that. And I did. And that ended up being the house that we lived in.
Was that the 811 house just outside? We could have thrown a rock and hit Fort Bragg with how close it was.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So that was my entrance into real estate. And so pretty close to the start of our relationship, because you moved in what, 2011 or something like that?
Because I just failed Ranger School, August of 2012.
Okay. Got it, yeah. So not that long, maybe a few years tops after I purchased that house. That's what kind of launched me into real estate. And it was right after I purchased that house. That's when our other roommate, John Voss, he was also coming to Fort Bragg. He's like, hey, you need a place to stay? I was like, you can stay at my place. So as soon as I closed on the house, was moving into it, had another Christian roommate coming in, and then basically it's been just full of Christian guys ever since I purchased it and closed on it, and didn't expect that either. But just became like this.
And one of them was an Iraqi sniper who got connected with 82nd Airborne guys, found his faith, and then he was in our house as well.
Yeah, Tex. He's got a book out about that too, which is pretty cool. Anyhow, yeah, it just became this bustling house of ministry, which I didn't expect. But also, all the guys that were living there, you being one of them, everyone was basically paying the mortgage, and I was and still getting a good deal too, because you know the Army pays the BAH,
Right.
and you guys were all paying under BAH. So it was a win-win for everyone. And I was thinking, wow, this is actually pretty cool.
Right.
I get a free house, and I could just get like 5, 10 of these and never have to work again. At least that was my thinking at the time. I know better now. But anyhow, I was like, wow, this is pretty cool. I should look into this more. That's when I started reading like Rich Dad, Poor Dad and The 4-Hour Work Week and, you know, the typical entry books that get people in. And then that's what launched me. So really that was close to like 2010 when I first started in real estate and didn't know a lick about real estate or business. But also really wasn't until about 2018, I think, was the year, either 17 or 18. I also felt like God was saying, hey, you should go into land and pursue real estate as a business, not just as like a side hobby, side investment kind of a thing, but actually be intentional about this. So I was like, okay. And that's when I went into land investing. That's when I met my now partner, Dave Deniston, and it's been an amazing ride, incredible ride. Land has been probably my favorite form of business and real estate, but also later got into like short-term rentals, so Airbnbs and VRBOs, have done tax liens and a little bit of syndication and like kind of the gambit to some degree, and some other business ventures too that aren't even real estate related. So definitely got to see the highs and lows, ups and downs, pros and cons of a lot of different things in real estate and business in general. And I have a passion for it. I love it now, but it's not for the faint of heart. That's for sure.
Yeah, definitely. So I remember you told me this would have been right when I was starting to get into land. So that would have been, I came to visit you and Meredith before you guys had a kid. So that would have been like Thanksgiving of 2020. I had just started my land business and I drove over from Kansas City to Colorado Springs to hang out with you guys for the weekend. And you showed me all the nuts and bolts of your land business. But I remember at the time, you said something along the lines of, hey, if I live frugally, I could retire right now. And that was like 4.5 years ago. Oh, I'm assuming you're in a better spot now. What is it like to like keep working when you know you don't really have to? Does it seem like futile? Is it now fun? Has your burn rate increased? Like, what's life like now?
Yeah, good question. Well,
and let's clarify what you're doing. You're in the reserves, so you're not working full-time for the Army. You're just currently helping out overseas for a project.
That's right. Yeah, I like that terminology.
Or National Guard.
Yeah,
I think you're National Guard.
National Guard. Tomato, tomato. Yeah. Yeah, so, I mean, one could argue, has my standard of living increased? Well, I'm currently in the desert, living in a container that you can see behind me.
With a 0 burn rate. I love it. Other than Meredith and the kid.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, one could argue that my standard of living has gone downhill, at least for this season while I'm in Iraq. And I'm sure we'll talk about this. I actually enjoy the military, and so I didn't want to let go aspects of that, and that's why I stayed in the National Guard despite not needing the paycheck per se. And so there's aspects of it that I do enjoy, and there's other things that I enjoy too. But to kind of answer your question, I think this idea of, man, if you just work hard enough, if you do the right things, if you create the right businesses or financial freedom or whatever, then you'll arrive and then you're going to be happy. And then everything is sunshine and rainbows after that. Like, it's a myth. Doesn't exist.
You just nailed the reason why I have this podcast, Eric. Because I just like thought about that 6 months ago. And I'm like, this was a myth. I got to talk to people about this. So that's why we're here.
Yeah, and I'm glad you're talking about it because like all of the Facebook, YouTube, Instagram ads are just like everyone's saying, oh, just follow my model, you'll get financial freedom. and it's going to be amazing. And I mean, you could build financial freedom a million different ways, and probably most of those models work. But I think the subliminal messaging of everything is going to be perfect afterwards is not the right message. It doesn't exist. And there is, I mean,
Yep.
I think financial freedom is a vehicle, it's a means to an end, and I think it's a good thing to pursue, 100%. But it is, again, just a means to an end. It's not the end in and of itself. So I think when people pursue it, they think it's the end. And once they get it, they will have arrived, so to speak. But it's pretty much never the case.
So what's the end?
That's a big, big question. Just start a podcast about that.
Well, we got an hour.
Perfect. Okay. Yeah. Well, if you were to ask Eric Wong, in my humble, very minuscule perspective and opinion, I would say ultimately it's going to come down to relationships. And if you were to refine that even further, it's going to start ultimately with a relationship with God and then with people, and then it goes out from there. And if you're looking for fulfillment, or this very esoteric term that we call happiness that we say we want and we kind of put on everything, you're really only going to find that in that context. Relationships, but specifically starting with God, in my humble opinion, and then the relationships around you. And then it can go out from there. And yes, you can find some level of satisfaction and sense of purpose in business and real estate and those kinds of things. And I've tasted some of that. But I can also say that if that's all you got, it's not going to be enough. And it will leave you high and dry eventually. And you'll be left wondering, is this all there is to life? So that's my very condensed version of, what is the end state? I'd say the bigger question is, how do you get there? That's a $1 million question.
Right. Like what to do next. Because I think a lot of us are faith-based entrepreneurs, and we know the book answers, right? We know that it's the most satisfying to serve others. It's the most satisfying to worship our Creator. It's the most satisfying to have a purpose bigger than just making money for ourselves, right? But it almost seems too simple. Like that answer just seems too easy. But maybe that's it, right? What do you think?
Well, I think it's simple and complex at the same time. Just like faith, it's like, what's the secret to faith? Well, you just believe. But just believing is also a very complex thing when you look at what that means day to day and how to live life. So I think it's very similar in that, when you keep it simple and stupid, it just really comes down to, and Christians know this, of course, but love God, love people, and then everything else falls into place. I really believe that. And I think there's a science behind it too. And I've really kind of nerded out and kind of become a self-proclaiming neuroscience nerd to kind of study, like, okay, how does it work? Why does it work? Is there a way to engineer it? Because I'm a very analytical brain. Like I like to break things down and systematize things.
Just come clean, Eric. You're a West Point graduate.
Yes, that's true. Not all West Point grads are created equal.
Don't hide it. You're the best of the best.
That's also a myth. Let's run with that. I'll take it.
Okay, let me share this short story. I would wake up at 3 a.m. This would have been 2013. I'd wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning to go to a jump. So to go to the hangar to put on the parachute and jump out of an airplane. But it's a very long process, so you had to get there really early in the morning. And I'd walk past Eric's door, and he wouldn't have a jump. He would have to wake up at 6 a.m. or 5 a.m., right? And his light would be on, and I'd look through the crack, and he'd be doing push-ups at 2 or 3 in the morning. And finally, I asked him, I'm like, what are you doing? You're just always awake. You're always working out. You're always learning. You're always doing stuff. And he's like, yeah, I just find that if I do push-ups every 2 hours throughout the whole day, that's how I stay in shape. And for those of you who don't know Eric, he's always ripped. He's always got muscles. He's always has a six-pack all year round. And that's just, he's just another, you can't relate to this guy. He just seems like a whole nother, cut from another cloth. So that's my story on you.
We're just having comedy.
So I think you are different, Eric.
Cut and ripped. I wish that were the case. I don't remember that story, but it's very, very possible. I believe it.
I guarantee it. My memory is usually pretty good. But I interrupted you. Keep going.
Where was I? Just talking about how to get there? Was that what we were talking about?
I think so.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, I was talking about the neuroscience piece. Like, yeah.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
we were just highlighting how much of a nerd I am, which thank you for that. I accept it. I
Yep.
put that label on myself. Really, for the past, I don't know how many years now, maybe 8 years, I've been nerding out on neuroscience specifically and looking at the intersection of neuroscience with faith, with business, with marriage, with life. And it's been pretty incredible. But all that to say, there is an amazing science that shows how we are biologically wired to look for and find the end state. And it's written in every human being. It's written in our DNA. It's written in our brain, in the wiring in our brain. And understanding that has helped me kind of figure out the path to, okay, how do I want to navigate to the end state? And I won't say I've arrived to the end state, but I can say that to me, the path is clear now. And I'm going to strive to walk in that path, and I'm going to keep pursuing that. But to me, it'll ultimately, the path, if you want to keep it simple again, love God, love people. But there's a whole neurology behind that supports it as well. So it's almost like God kind of knew what he was talking about when he put it in the Bible.
So can you give us a sneak peek? Because I'm a little bit of an enthusiast with like understanding neurotransmitters and serotonin,
Sure.
dopamine.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just talk a little bit about that, because that sounds really
Well,
interesting.
let me just speak to that language. So yeah, the neurotransmitters, there's really four main ones that most people know, and they're the major ones. There's other ones, of course, but these are like the ones that really dominate our state of happiness or lack thereof, if you want to call it happiness. And so most people know that you've got dopamine. And so when we're looking at happiness and success and business and building an empire, typically that's coming from dopamine. It does feel good for a time, but the kick is it's short-lived.
Yeah.
It's also addictive, and also you need more and more and more of it to feel that same sense of fulfillment. And so it becomes a never-ending pursuit,
Yeah.
which is what a lot of us entrepreneurs wrestle with. So there's the dopamine aspect, which is ultimately what we get when we are in business and real estate and that kind of stuff, pursuing financial freedom. But there's others that are really important as well. So you get the serotonin. So dopamine is the reward chemical or hormone. You get serotonin. This is kind of more of like the happiness or contentment hormone. It's kind of like the feeling that you get when you watch a sunset or a sunrise on a beach, kind of a thing. You get
Yeah.
oxytocin.
I think of it like monk state. Like serotonin is like feeling in monk state. Like when you're fasting, you have a lot of serotonin, not a
Yeah.
lot of dopamine.
Yeah, totally. And then you get oxytocin, which is like the love hormone, love chemical. And then you get endorphins, which is kind of like the euphoric chemical, but it's also tied to a lot of resilience. And so you can kind of think like if serotonin is like a low energy, all is well, kind of peace giving hormone, then endorphins is like the upper, if you will. It's like amps you up, makes you feel good, but it's high energy. And so really you need a combination of all four of those, actually. Dopamine isn't necessarily a bad guy, but when you pursue dopamine by itself, that's where it becomes destructive and becomes addictive and becomes this thing that's never enough. But if you can do life
Right.
with all four of those equally flowing every day, then neurologically in your brain, you're going to have that sense of contentment and more of that end state that we're looking for. This elusive happiness, if you will. So then it's the question, okay, how do you get more oxytocin, serotonin? I would say too that what's kind of elusive about this whole process is that if you just pursue those things in and of themselves, in other words, if you just pursue happiness for the sake of happiness, you'll probably also fall short, in my opinion,
Yeah.
and just from the studies that I've been studying. Basically, it's like if you just pursue happiness just to be happy, it will elude you. And so it really, in some senses, you can't engineer it. It has to come from an exchange between persons, if you will. Ideally from God and me, and then also with my wife and me and my kids and me, and then my community, my friends, etc.
All four of those things. Because I think of endorphins like going for a run or working out.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, that's a huge part, but also think of like when you're laughing, that's also a big source of endorphins. So if you think of like in
Okay.
relationships, like if you never laugh, if you never smile, if you never have fun, if you're never silly and playful, you don't get those endorphins, right? So even in relationships, you want a healthy dose of endorphins as well. Not just, cuddling on the couch watching TV or something, which you might get some serotonin from that or oxytocin, but you also need times for endorphins as well. So, I'm a big believer that you gotta be in situations, in circumstances, in environments that facilitate that. But in and of itself, like you won't be able to create that in and of yourself. It has to be a reciprocal
Right.
thing that's happening in the context of a community.
You can't just schedule it in like 3 p.m. I'm going to go tickle my wife
That's
and
right.
laugh.
Yep, exactly.
So you got to do it naturally. Like, how do you do it naturally? I mean, maybe that's a whole nother conversation. People have written books
yeah.
on that. Like, you can't just check the blocks, right?
Right. Yep. You can't. And I think people who might try and I've tried to do it, but when I try to engineer it on my own ability, on my own understanding, it almost inevitably always falls short for one reason or another. Unless, in my experience, you're starting that exchange first with God. And so, to me, it's almost like every human being is like a cup, like this cup, right? And every human being can be, at any moment, varying levels of filled. And so when I go to, let's say, another human, there's an exchange that happens, dropping bottles here, where I can pour some of this into this, and then this cup will feel filled up, at least for the time being. There's an exchange that happens, right? There should be a pouring into this cup, and then a pouring into this cup. But I think where it falls short is what happens if this bottle's already empty? It's got nothing to pour into this cup, right? Or what happens when you run out of tea, in this case, in this cup, then you're not going to be able to fill up this bottle. And so that's where inevitably it breaks down, is because we as humans have finite capacity and finite ability to fill up our own cups. And eventually, when we look for that in one another, it's going to lead to a lot of disappointment and missed expectations. And so that's why I'm a firm believer that it's got to come from God first, because he will never be empty. Like, if this is the Lord's vessel, if you will, it's always overflowing. And so I got to go to him first to get filled up.
Okay.
And then I can have that exchange also with my family, with my wife, etc.
So I understand that, because I've gone through seasons where I feel like my cup has been overflowing. I don't feel like I'm in that season right now. But for me, and also for the audience, how do we go to God to get your cup filled up?
Yeah, good question. I think, to me, this is where the neuroscience has helped incredibly and immensely. And unfortunately, I didn't learn a lot of this stuff, like I said, probably until about 8 years ago. It started to be revealed to me through my mentor. And then even then, it probably really didn't click until a few years after that. And so this is a relatively new experience for me in my walk with God. And I would say my walk with God now, in the past couple of years, is better than it's ever been before in the history of my walk with God. And that would also include, when I first had my most intimate, passionate, exciting experiences when you come to Jesus, and it's like everything is incredible and the only thing that matters is Jesus, and you just want to give your life to Jesus every day of your life, and you have this honeymoon experience. Then eventually it's like life kind of settles in, all the hardship of life settles in, and you got all these empty bottles that you got to fill, and you find yourself being dry eventually. And it's like, man, like, where did that euphoric feeling go? I would say knowing what I know now and practicing it has allowed me to feel more fulfilled than even that season of euphoria. And so what I'll kind of share is as briefly as I can, because it's a lot of geeking out that I've done to try to understand it. But it really comes down to knowing how the brain works and using that pathway to activate the parts of the brain that allow that relational connection with God specifically. And with people. So we do the same thing with our spouses, with our family members, but specifically with God, when we're talking about that, it's no different. And I think I was taught, okay, when you want to connect with God, what you do is you open up your Bible, you might pray a little bit, you might listen to some praise music, and then you read your Bible. All the good things, and I don't disagree with those things, but those things in and of themselves don't necessarily create relational connection. Those things can and have been for me at various times, things where I just check the block, I'm rushing through it just to do it. I'm just reading information to put more information in my brain, but not to relationally connect. And using my head instead of my heart, I think that's some other terminology that's been used in Christian circles. And so now what I know is that if I were to, approach you, Drew, and want to spend time with you, I wouldn't be like, okay, great, glad we're here. Let me pull out my connection with Drew time checklist. And let me make sure that
that would be weird.
it'd be a little bit weird.
Like if I saw you sneaking like underneath the table, you're trying to hide
Right.
it from me, and then it falls on the ground, and I can like see the checklist.
Right. Yeah. Like let me make sure that I'm doing something that's connecting us in a musical way, and then
You got to pat me on the shoulder, shake my hand,
yeah,
smile.
and then also let me read some bullet points or information about you while we're together, and then let me tell
Right.
you my requests for the day. And then, all right, well, hey, good hanging out with
Right.
you. I'll see you tomorrow, right? We oftentimes
Yeah.
treat God and our times with God that way. And I did for most of my life up until recently.
Right.
And so, all that to say, I'm sure there's a lot of folks who can probably empathize with that. For me, the light bulb moment was realizing that's not how relational circuits work. Relational circuit, everything I just described, is all left brain. But relational circuits are all right brain. And the two are very different. Like the left brain is essentially very analytical, planning, execution, systematic, compartmentalized. But the right brain is artistic, creative, relational, emotional, spontaneous, abstract, right? And so we connect with others with the right brain, not the left brain. And so
Right.
I've been, frankly, approaching God through that methodology with my left brain, because I thought, oh, if I can connect with God and refine my ability to use my left brain, I'm going to have a better relationship with God. But that never came to be. That never worked. No matter how hard I studied, no matter how much time I devoted, how disciplined I was, how early I woke up to do it, none of that actually made my relationship with God deeper. If anything, over the years, it made me more frustrated. Like, why isn't this working? And so as I learned, okay, relational circuits on the right side of the brain, I started to learn, okay, how do you activate those relational circuits? How do you actually have quality time, not just quantity time with God? And it really, what I've learned is that it's a subconscious endeavor. Like when you and I connect, Drew, we connect subconsciously way before a word is ever said, way before we ever talk to one another. Usually it's like when I walk in the room, I see you. There's a part in my brain that lights up subconsciously way before I can even process what's going on in the room.
Right.
And that's the level.
Like you know my mood
Right.
instantly.
That's why they say, like, communication is 95% body language, or whatever that percentage is. I think it's 95%.
Right.
It's because we see and perceive and sense things subconsciously way before and way faster and way more deeply than we process conscious thought. But we approach God with conscious thought, with that checklist, and it just doesn't work. And so for me, it's been a journey of how do I connect with God subconsciously, where it's like I walk into the room and I see my best friend or the love of my life or, long lost, whatever, for the first time. And without exchanging any words, how can I have that knowing, that sense, that feeling subconsciously to open up those relational circuits? So there's a lot there, and I could even break down the parts of the brain and how they work and how those are activated. But you can kind of think of it like, just like when you walk into a room with a person, the same thing is happening. You see them, you might hear them. In some cases, you might feel them. I mean, it might be kind of weird. You might smell them. But in other words, you're using your five senses, and those things plug directly into your subconscious, into your brainstem.
So is that at the beginning of your time with God, or is that the whole time? Or are you just doing this throughout the whole day?
Well, ideally you practice it throughout the whole day, and ideally you practice the presence of God the whole day. I'll say that I'm still in practice. I haven't arrived. I haven't figured out how to do that well all day, every day. But I think you can get in the habit of seeing God, hearing God, feeling God, all of those things throughout the day. And I'm getting better at it. But I can say that that practice has changed my walk with God to the point where the best part of my day, every day, period, is my time with God. And that's what fills up my cup, to kind of bring it back to the original discussion.
Okay, so you walk into the room and then subconsciously you're connecting with God. And how much conscious thought is going on?
Yeah, there
So is it mostly feeling?
is some conscious thought. So it might be helpful if I kind of walk you through my practice, and then I can kind of break down what's happening.
Okay.
Just based on the neuroscience I've learned. And what I practice came from the neuroscience that I studied about how to activate those relational circuits. And also from a book called The 4 Keys to Hearing God's Voice by Mark Verkler, which I felt like God was telling me to read that. It was sitting on my bookshelf for years. And then after I read it, I was like, these are the 4 keys. Why didn't I read this sooner? And you kind of need to believe that they work, and you need to practice it, and it comes over time. Anyways, so this is what I do. And a lot of it comes from that book, and then also the neuroscience. So the first thing I try to do is I try to just be still, just quiet myself, quiet my thoughts, my emotions, whatever is going on, and I try to be still. Sometimes having some kind of like breathing practice helps with that, like slow breathing or box breathing. My wife's a yoga instructor, so she's excellent at these kinds of things. But you can kind of think like when you go to a yoga class, you're intentionally setting everything aside to enter into this moment, and there's physical things you can do to help you enter into that moment. So that's what I kind of do, is I kind of still myself. And that's also consistent with the 4 keys. And the next thing I do is I try to enter into a secret place with him, with God. And so to me, it's typically the same place every time, but it doesn't have to be, I don't think. And in this place, it's like my happy place, like Happy Gilmore. It's like my happy place. I go in there.
Okay.
There's actual things. There's like, for me, there's like a lake. There's like a log we can sit on. There's this huge tree that provides shade. There's a beautiful forest around. There's some mountains in the backdrop. That's like my happy place. And that's where I personally meet Jesus every single time. And so I will intentionally enter into that space. And let me back up. To prep for that, I'll try to intentionally absorb my environment physically first before I enter that happy place.
Okay.
So
I was smiling. What would you do if in your happy place you saw me in the forest? Like just my face.
yeah, I'd be like, hey, you need to...
Hey, get out of my thoughts, right? I hope I didn't ruin your happy place.
I've actually seen people...
Like, am I going to...
I've seen people before in my happy place, but usually it's Jesus bringing them into it. So if I saw your face kind of floating around and be like, oh, okay, like, what do you want me to do with Drew, Jesus?
No, I'd be like snooping around, like tiptoeing, like trying to be all sneaky, but I'm 6'3", so it wouldn't really work that well.
We'd probably have a good time. Jesus has got a good sense of humor. We've had some funny moments.
That's true.
Yeah, so...
I believe it.
To prep for that place, I forgot to mention this part, but when I'm stilling myself, I will also try to see and experience God in the physical first. So I'll try to notice what I see physically. I'll try to notice what I feel physically, what I can hear physically, maybe what I can smell, maybe what I can taste. But I try to specifically observe God in my physical environment. And for me, it really comes down to God is the author and giver of every good thing, every good gift. So if you have light, that's a gift. If there's a beautiful thing outside your window, that's a gift. If it's a nice temperature, that's a gift, right? If you have a comfy bed, that's a gift. Literally every good thing that you can possibly think of comes from God. And so I just enter into a practice of observing all those good things and observing God in those things. And that helps me open up into that happy place. All right, tracking with me still?
I'm tracking. This room has no furniture, so I have to keep moving up and down because my knees are very sore.
I gotcha.
So I'm following you.
Well, okay, so that's kind of like the prep.
So you're absorbing the surroundings. You're visualizing. You first quieted yourself, right? And then you start listening.
Yeah, so those things, scientifically, what that does is it starts activating your subconscious and opening up your subconscious, because in the brain, you have your 5 senses, those filter into your brainstem, and that immediately goes into the thalamus. And so the thalamus is the part of the brain that says, am I alone or is someone with me? Am I connected? Am I attached or not? And so the first part of the subconscious is immediately assessing, am I alone or am I attached? And it's also known as the attachment center. And so that's happening at a fraction of a second. So what I'm really trying to do is, by looking for God in my atmosphere, I'm telling my subconscious I'm not alone. Actually, God is with me. And that's starting to activate the relational circuits subconsciously. So that's some of the science behind it. That happens in the thalamus, subconsciously. And then I'll intentionally enter into my secret place. And that's where all the beautiful stuff is. And sometimes you're floating in the background in a weird, ominous way.
Snooping, tiptoeing.
But once I'm there, I'll also try to absorb through my 5 spiritual senses now, if you will. What do I see? What do I hear? What do I feel? What do I taste? What do I smell? In that happy place. And it's way better there, typically, than it is here physically. And it's incredible. It's always beautiful. It's always perfect. And then I see Jesus. Now, before I engage Jesus or he engages me, I just let that moment kind of sink in. And I
Okay.
observe Jesus, and I just absorb what is his demeanor, his disposition, what is his expression, what are his micro expressions, how does he feel, like what is his body language to me now that I've entered into this space. And I just absorb that. And I'm very intentional to be like, well, is he happy? Is he excited? Has he been waiting for me? A lot of times he's been waiting for me. Sometimes I'll show up and he can't wait to show me something, like a little kid. Sometimes I'll show up and we'll just be lying down and he'll be lying down next to me and we'll just be kind of peacefully lying together. Sometimes we'll show up and then we take off flying. So it's always different. Sometimes it starts with like a hug. Sometimes it starts with, us standing side by side looking over the lake. But every time is different. Literally every single time, my engagement with Jesus and how he interacts with me is different. And I just take a moment to absorb that. Before we say any words, before we do anything, I just want to bask in that moment. And usually at that point, like my relational circuits are firing all cylinders. When I can see and experience and know his joy to be with me in that moment, it's like everything else just melts away in the world.
Okay. How long, I guess, how much practice did that take, and then how long would that moment be?
It takes a lot of practice for most folks. I like to share this in some other nonprofit endeavors, and I like to help people with this that have also struggled with similar things that I've struggled with. It takes practice, a lot of practice, because especially in a Western American society and a Western evangelical community culture, we're taught to use our left brain for everything. And so it's kind of like if you haven't used your right brain for these kinds of things very much, it's like going to the gym for the first time. It's going to suck. It's going to be hard. It's going to be confusing. And you're probably not going to want to do it. So you got to kind of work up to it.
So even my question, how long it takes, that's like left brain, like what kind of time slot can I plug it into?
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah, like today. So, I mean, the reality is we have time hacks. We have all these things we got to do, all these priorities. And so the left brain part of me tries to schedule it. And I actually try to aim for like about 15, 20 minutes of this time with Jesus. But today, when I started it was going to be like a 15, 20 minute, ended up being like an hour and a half. And sometimes it's like 10 minutes. Sometimes it's like, hey, only got time for 10 minutes or even 5 minutes. Okay, I'm going to get what I can get.
But God can expand time, right? I mean, it can take 5 chronological minutes, but have you ever felt like you were in there for 2 or 3 hours?
I have, yeah. And again, I think it just takes a lot of practice using the right brain and the relational circuits to be at that point. Again, I haven't arrived, but I've had times in that I don't call it a quiet time because that gets the wrong connotation. I call that my heaven time. So I try to do heaven time every day. And I've had times where like I'd have a whole day with Jesus. Like we'd start sunup and then we'd end sundown in my secret place. And we'd do all these awesome, crazy things like run around, fly around, go swimming, just have this blast, and then end the day. Usually we end the day by the fire. And sometimes we do that in the span of about 15 minutes. Earth time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and I know some people will be like, oh, that's all in Eric's imagination. That's all in his head.
No,
Yeah,
I believe it.
I mean, the reality is you do have to start with some of your imagination, and I do believe the Holy Spirit uses your imagination. And yeah, there will be some percentage of things that you might generate on your own, but I do believe a certain percentage will be things that the Holy Spirit generates. And I do believe all the imagery...
The percentage will increase.
Yeah, I think so. And I think like... You could argue like all the prophets in the Old Testament, every time they got imagery, you could say, oh, they were just using their imagination. They just imagined these things. Well, I think the Holy Spirit used their imagination to bring all this imagery to speak to those prophets and to the people of Israel. So I think he still speaks.
Well, and all those visions aligned. I mean, these guys are centuries apart and they're all visualizing the same exact thing. Mm-hmm. I mean, how can that be a coincidence?
Right. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so for me, it does start with like you got to practice using your imagination, and probably early on there's going to be a higher percentage of you just making stuff up than the Holy Spirit using it. For some, maybe more than others, but eventually that percentage becomes smaller and smaller, and the percentage that comes from the Holy Spirit becomes larger and larger. In the book, The Four Keys to Hearing God's Voice actually talks about that. The four keys specifically are you still yourself or be quiet, and then you open yourself up to spontaneity. You look and you listen for whatever comes to you. Don't judge it, don't reject it, just whatever comes to you, you receive it. And the fourth step is you write it down, you journal it, essentially. And the reason why you journal it is so that way you can have an analytical log to see what are the patterns, what are the trends, what's the history. You can also take that and share it with mentors or more mature spiritually folks that you trust. And they can tell you, yeah, this was God. I don't know if this was from God. But eventually you start to learn, okay, I think this is the Lord. This is not the Lord. And it becomes like muscle memory.
It's like the sheep know my voice.
Right.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
It's through practice.
Yeah, totally.
I've done bits and pieces of that. Like I have an exercise I do where I lay down in this grassy meadow next to Jesus. But I probably have undiagnosed ADHD. Like I'm gone in 3 minutes. Like he's probably just about to speak, and I'm like, all right, that was great.
Yeah.
Gotta go.
Well, I think that's most folks actually. I think a lot of that is actually induced by society today and the current environment that we live in today. We live in a very short attention span. Everything is like, you got shorts on Instagram and Facebook and like Netflix series. If you ever go back and watch like movies from the 90s, you'll be like, man, this is so slow and so boring compared to like movies now.
Right.
So we have been taught by society to have such short attention spans. I just read a book called The Dopamine Detox. It talks about like, it's actually physically painful. Was it that book? Or it might have been another book. Maybe it was Do Hard Things. But it talks about it's actually hard for most Americans or people in general in this day and age to sit with their own thoughts for a prolonged period of time. And they actually did a study.
Yes, that's me.
I think that's me too. I think that's most of us. They did a study where basically they left people alone in a room where they could basically be alone with their thoughts for it's like 20 minutes or something like that. Or they could like shock themselves and physically induce pain in themselves. And the vast majority of folks, after about like 5 minutes, would just start shocking themselves because they could not bear with their own thoughts and being alone with their thoughts. It's pretty wild.
So I always blamed it on getting married, because when you get married, have kids, you're always around people. I feel like before marriage, I feel like I was really good at, and back then I identified as an introvert. Now I would say I'm an extrovert, but I feel like before marriage, I was great at spending hours and hours alone and enjoying it, going on long walks, having my thoughts to myself, sitting in a chair and just thinking about life. And now I rarely get to do that. And I find the only time I actually get to do that is that first 12 hours of a business trip when you land and no meetings have started yet. And you don't want to watch TV in the hotel room, and you brought a book to read, but you don't really feel like reading it. So you're just like, you have like 2 hours to kill before bed, but there's nothing to do. And I find that now I'm very uncomfortable with that alone time. And again, I blamed it on always being around people, but maybe my brain has changed.
I
don't know.
There's another book called Dopamine Nation. I also nerd out in lots of books. This book, Dopamine Nation, talks about like basically we as a nation, I'd say we as humanity have become addicted to dopamine now, where our brain has been trained to look for the next dopamine fix, whether it's a swipe on some kind of dating app or on Instagram or on Netflix or an email or a text message. Like every time we get that stuff, we get a small hit of dopamine. And so now our brain is searching for that automatically every moment, whether we know it or not. So I think most folks, if not all, will struggle with that unless they've been living in the cave.
So how do I delete the social media apps on my phone, and then I download them when I want to use them, and then I delete them again. So that's a barrier, but I feel like that only helps a little. I mean, is there like a Cliff Notes version of what you learned on that?
Well, basically, so dopamine in and of itself is not bad unless you get high amounts of it and it's isolated, and then whatever is causing the dopamine release becomes addictive. So it could be like eating food, it could be working out, it could be doing drugs, sex, you name it. If you do that in a vacuum, eventually you become addicted to that thing, especially if you do it in conjunction with like stress. So if you're stressed out and you go to Facebook or Instagram, social media for a release, you will become addicted to that because your brain subconsciously will learn, okay, if I want to de-stress, go to this thing, and I get this little bit of dopamine hit and becomes addictive. And so the way to counter that, a dopamine addiction of any kind, is actually with those other three neurotransmitters we mentioned before. serotonin, oxytocin, endorphins. So, in the brain, biologically, that's how you start to undo those dopamine addictions. When you're with people, when you're out in nature, when you're having that quiet time alone, and specifically when you're alone, trying to get serotonin, oxytocin, dopamine, and endorphins, like those things will help counteract that addiction. So it just comes with practice, like most things. You got to practice the balance of those other neurotransmitters.
So I'm going to turn it into a checklist again, which we're not supposed to do, but it's basically go on walks in nature, go for runs, do your heaven time, and like hold hands with your wife. Is that boiling it down too easy?
Well, I mean, that's a great start. I would definitely start there. I think most of the gurus or experts out there would agree, like, yeah, do all those things 100%. So I wouldn't say no to those things. I'll say, though, that the brain is a tricky little thing. The brain knows when you are contriving things, when you're checking the block on things, when you're making a checklist. And so the brain's going to know, okay, you're doing this thing, but actually you're just doing it because you know you're supposed to and you're checking the block. And it becomes, once again, a left brain activity when it should be a right brain activity. That's the danger, right? Okay. So when it's like, okay, I need to go and hold my wife's hand now, am I checking a block, left brain, or am I actually enjoying it and engaging in it, right brain? That's the trick. That's
okay. What if, let's say you buy a cabin in the woods and you marry a slow wife, so you have to hold her hand and run to get to the grocery store. And what's the other thing? I don't know a way to force a quiet time. But like, can you design your life so that you're doing those things naturally? I know the answer is yes, but what does that look like for like normal people who live in cities?
Yeah, great question. So I'll kind of give you the cheat code, if you will. And this is, of those 8-ish years of studying neuroscience, this is one of the main conclusions that I've gotten. It really comes down to authentic joy, I'll say, which I would define joy as me being glad to be with you and you being glad to be with me. And it's reciprocal, right? And you can't engineer that. I can't be like, okay, now is my time to hold Drew's hand and skip through the forests, and I'm going to like it. I either like it or I don't. I can't force it.
And that connects the dots. Like that reaffirms what I've heard, where they did all these studies on identical twins, and we all know that diet, exercise, and sleep are like the top 3 most important things. But there's one thing that trumps all 3 of those, which is the health of your relationships. And so they found that like you have identical twins. One twin is isolated, stays at home, but they eat really well and they exercise. And then the other twin like smokes and drinks, but laughs all the time with their friends. And like the twin that smokes and drinks and laughs more lives longer. That like overlays with what I've heard. I mean, so makes sense.
You can watch and read all the studies about blue zones, like people who live the longest on Earth. The common denominator, bar none, is just awesome relationships, like great community. Like that's the common denominator.
So that's the cheat code.
So the cheat code. So the question is, how do you have great community? I think that's also a big struggle in America. People don't know how to have great relationships anymore, and so because we're always we're always going to social media instead of actually engaging with people on a relational basis, and so people have forgotten how to have deep, fulfilling relationships. So the question is, how do you have those relationships now? And I think that the cheat code is you got to enjoy it. That's the key. You got to find ways to enjoy the relationship authentically. And so if I'm ever trying to manufacture a relationship but I don't actually enjoy it, that should be a signal like, hey, I got to redirect. I got to approach this relationship a new way where I can now start to appreciate this person authentically. I can enjoy this person authentically. I can enjoy this time authentically. So for me, I enter my heaven time with the Lord with one, first and foremost, is I want to enjoy my time with God. If I haven't enjoyed my time with God, it was a waste of time. And I probably wasn't actually connecting with the Lord. And it took a long time to get to the point where I was consistently enjoying my time with the Lord. But now it's like, this is the best part of my day, all day, every day. And I authentically enjoy it. So I would say, whatever it takes to enjoy the relationship, whether that's God or people, that's what you should focus on. And that's going to get you that authentic relational connection.
I think I got it. So what about, let's say there's people that just don't bring you joy, don't bring you energy. Maybe they've got this like weird victim aura around them. Do we ditch them or do we find other ways to make it work?
All right, so like every marriage is going to have highs and lows.
No, I don't mean in my spouse. I mean some like acquaintance that I don't even have to be around.
I'm going to use marriage though, because marriage has the highest highs and the lowest lows, right? For most people. And so what do you do when you're at that lowest low point in your marriage? And it happens to everyone who's been married longer than a day. What do you do at that point? Do you continue to fight and tell them why they're wrong for X, Y, and Z, or why you don't like X, Y, and Z? What you should do, and typically, eventually, what we do when we make up is we find something that we can connect with, something we can agree with, something that we can enjoy maybe with the other person, and find that common ground, and then we rebuild off of that. And so sometimes, in marriage, that's like, after I take a step back from the situation, I can think, well, my wife, she's a mother of my child. She's done X, Y, and Z. She's amazing in all these ways. Maybe I should go back and try to reconcile, right? And so me taking a step back.
So you see the gold in them.
Yeah.
You look for the gold.
Things that I genuinely and authentically appreciate and enjoy. So if it's like a complete stranger that I never met before and they immediately like try to insult me or whatever, what I want to do, if I want to try to relationally connect with them, is I should try to find something to connect with and to appreciate with that person. That's kind of like the first step. Something that I can authentically appreciate about that person. And then I can work on the rest of the relationship from there. So it might be like, man, this guy is an a-hole, but I respect that he has the same appreciation for nature as I do, or for business as I do, or whatever, right? And then I can start to reframe it in my mind to authentically appreciate that aspect of them. And then you can work up, then you can build up, then you can turn the relationship around if you want to.
That's why I bought a motorcycle right after moving into your house, because I wanted to connect with you. So for the listeners, Eric would drive this, do you drive a motorcycle? Eric would ride a Gixxer 1000 GXR, and he never oiled the chain. So he was riding this truly powerful machine, and it was like the most rusty chain ever. And he rode it like that for like 10 years. Do you still have that bike?
Yeah.
And I bet the chain is still rusty, and you still haven't crashed, and it's a miracle. It is a miracle that thing has not crashed. So yeah, I bought a bike probably in part to like have something to connect with you over. Of course, I had motorcycle before that, so I was already riding, but makes sense what you're saying.
The Ducati, I remember. It was nice.
Yeah, the Ducati that never worked, and then I bought the FZ, which was awesome, and I just bought another one. I bought a CC Kawasaki. I keep downgrading.
I haven't ridden in a while.
But okay. So let's get back on track. So you find the gold in the person. So are you always trying to, like, do you ever dump any friends? So, the business advice, Alex Hormozy would say, the very moment that you're around someone that stops accelerating you towards your business goals, you need to part ways, which I get, but it just seems kind of heartless sometimes. I mean, what if our role in that person's life for that season is to be the giver and not receive reciprocal amounts?
Yeah,
right?
Great point. And I actually love Alex Hormozy. I'm a big fan for all things left brain. But what we're talking about is how do you engage right brain? So I would not get advice from Alex Hormozy on right brain things. I would get advice all day, every day for left brain things, like how do you build a business? But if I wanted to have advice on how to have a great relationship with my daughter, I probably wouldn't consult with Alex. And so I think that there's a time and place for everything, just like the Bible says. I think that when I'm looking at who are going to be my trusted long-term business partners, I'm going to be very selective, and I'm going to say no to a lot of people and yes to only a few people. And I think that's probably somewhat in line with what Alex is talking about. Like, align yourself, at least when you're trying to accelerate in business, with the right people. And I agree with that. However, when you're talking about right brain function, right brain activity, authentically enjoying other people, that is a different part of the brain altogether. That's a different story. Does that make sense?
Okay. It does. Interesting. Well, I did not imagine we'd be talking about neuroscience in our talk today. I think I did have a list of questions, but we kind of touched on all of them. Here's a good one for you.
Hit me.
So they've done scans, and I've asked this to every guest so far. They've done brain scans, and they found that drug addicts and entrepreneurs like pretty much have the same brains, and both groups are very obsessive type people, and entrepreneurs have just found better ways to obsess over, things that are productive for the most part. And there's a lot of entrepreneurs that are drug addicts as well. But my question to you is, do you believe that balance exists? Because I feel like a lot of us, and I identify as one of them, the reason that we are able to scale and do really well is because we obsess over it, right? We focus, but then we blink and we realize that it's been a year and like our marriage hasn't improved, and we've forgotten about a bunch of things. Now, does balance exist? And if so, like, do we pursue it, or how do you achieve excellence in all the right categories that society wants you to do? It just seems impossible sometimes.
I actually think that, that's a common question, especially for entrepreneurs, because it's so hard to try to balance everything. I think how do you balance is the wrong question, personally. I think the right question is, what are the right priorities? And so
okay,
if you have the right priorities, I think that things will start to come in line, and you'll know when is the right time, the right season to give more time, focus, energy to some things and not other things, and vice versa, if the priorities are right. But I think the key is not how do I have the right ratio on my calendar or my schedule. The key more so is, what's my number one priority, and then my number two, and then number three. And I think the problem is entrepreneurs try to do it all, try to say everything is a priority, everything is number one. But in so doing, and they say, okay, I just got to balance, I got to make sure the ratio is evenly distributed amongst all these things, and then I'll have success in all these things. But that is a fallacy, and that ultimately will lead to demise long-term, in my opinion. And so really it comes down to, like, if the end state is I want fulfillment, I think to kind of summarize this whole conversation, fulfillment, if that's the end state, it'll come from relationships. And first and foremost, I think I would say it's got to come from Jesus, and then your marriage and so on, and then your family. If that's the end state, that's got to be priority number one. Before business, before financial freedom, before building the empire. And not everyone would agree with that, but I think you can still build your empire and have Jesus as the number one priority, and family as number two, and then the empire is number three, or community, empire, whatever. But I think Jesus has got to be the very, very top, period. If Jesus is number 2, 3, whatever, a close second, the whole thing will crumble. That's my opinion. And there will be times. Yeah, go
ahead. I get priority number one, that makes sense, but like priority number two, so the family, I could spend all day playing with my kids, and then no work gets done, right? So there's got to be a way to break it down. Can you just do a manual for us, Eric, and sell it? Just make the checklist. Come on.
Funny you mentioned that. If you just follow this link coming up and do this one-time down payment. Now, I think that I hear what you're saying, and again, what I'm saying sounds too simple, too easy. Like, oh yeah, just love God, love people. Of course, that's what the Bible says. But I think people, if they actually lived by that on a daily basis, I think they would be surprised to see how much success they see in all other arenas of life, including their business. I'm a firm believer in that, and I have my own testimonies to exemplify that. But I think that if you're, like, if you start to think like, well, maybe if I just have this right amount of hours for family every week and then for business, that is not going to stand the test of time, and it's not going to stand up against the numerous unexpected fires that are going to come up in life. It just won't. And so really what will stand the test of time in all those fires in life is going to be, is Jesus actually truly the number one priority in my heart and mind? And then is my wife and my family actually my number two priority in my heart and mind? And then is my business actually number 3 or 4, whatever the case is? Or am I just giving it lip service? And so I think that is the true test. That's what we got to question ourselves with. And I got to question myself on a regular basis, because sometimes I accidentally flip-flop them, like Jesus slipped down from number 1. And I can also see why now my businesses are slipping, because I forgot that Jesus got to be number 1. And so I've got a lot of stories like that too. All that to say, if the priorities are right in my heart, I really believe that everything else is going to fall into place. And there will be seasons where I'm going to, go out and have a week-long vacation and do nothing but spend time with my family. And then there will be times when I'll be away from my family and I'm just going to grind it out for my business all week, all day, every day.
Yeah.
There's just going to be different times, different seasons, different reasons. And so that will always change, but what should always be consistent are the priorities.
I believe it. There's been seasons where I feel like my priorities were in the correct order, and just everything seems to fall in place. Everything seems, you still have to like lace up your boots and plow the dirt, but the crops just seem to grow taller and greener and faster, And then we forget about God, and then we're out there watering ourselves, when we could just pray for rain. I worked at Home Depot in high school, and I watered plants outside. And it would take me, imagine Home Depot in the summer. They have so many trees in pots out in the parking lot. Out of an 8-hour shift, I would spend 4 hours watering all those plants. But if it rains, it's like automated. Everything's done in 30 minutes. I don't know. I think we're all missing the point.
Yeah. So I was kind of asking God, is there something that I should share on this podcast? Is there like a direction or a theme? What I felt like God was telling me in my heaven times recently, as I was consulting with him, was that, the name of the podcast is What's on the Other Side of Enough, or it's
the other side of enough.
And so I think enough is not what we think it is. And I feel like
okay,
enough actually is you gotta surrender the things of this world and come to Jesus, and you will find enough in him. And I think what we will find is that when we do that, we become as little children. And so the key really to the enough that we're looking for is not get more of the world, but less of the world. And in so doing, we become like children, and then we go to Jesus. And I kind of feel like that's kind of the bottom line. It's like this contradictory thing. Like, we want to be successful, so we build this vehicle so that way we can have financial freedom, so that way we can do more time of the things that we care about. But in so doing, what we sometimes end up doing is we build up more of the world within us. And I think what I heard God say is, that he's going to work with us, but ultimately we're going to find what we're looking for, the enough, when we surrender the world and we become like children, and we just enter his presence and we be with him. So go ahead.
So what about the people, because this podcast is actually more for, so when I say the other side of enough, I'm interviewing guests that it doesn't really matter what kind of financial point they've hit. What matters is that they've hit a mental state where they feel like they have enough money. And then they start to ask the questions, okay, if I have enough money, why am I stressing out? Why do I work so much?
Yeah.
And so what would you say to someone like that, where they're actually in a pretty healthy mindset, where they're abundance thinking, they're grateful, they feel pretty good, and they're not in that scarcity mindset. They're not striving towards something they haven't yet achieved. They know that they have enough, right? What would you say to them?
I would say you might feel like you have enough temporarily, but inevitably, being in this world, living in this life, there's going to be, I'll call it crap storms. Try to keep it PG-13. That come and rock your world, rock the boat, right? It's inevitable. And it's promised in the Bible also for Christians that are listening to this. You can't avoid it. No matter how successful you become,
Yep.
No matter how much of a financial base you build, there are going to come times when you're going to feel overwhelmed, when you're feeling like you're going underwater, period. That's either in business or in family
Right.
or personal or health or whatever the case is. It will come. It's not a matter of if, but when. And the only way to truly feel like you have enough in the midst of all of that in this world, in this life, is if you can surrender the world and then find a contentment with God. And in my opinion, you only do that when you become a little child in his presence. You enjoy the little things. It's kind of like what I was describing earlier. It's like you go in not with an agenda, not with a to-do list, not a wish list, but you go in just like a child and you enjoy his presence. If you think of your kids, for example, do you think there's ever times when they're content, when they're satisfied?
Of course.
Where would
Every day.
What are those moments like for them? What's the context for them being in that level of contentment, that satisfaction?
Like just an hour ago, or probably 2 hours ago, I was about to brush May's teeth. She's 6. And so I was holding the toothbrush with the toothpaste on it, ready to brush her teeth. But I was like humming this song, and every time the song would hit a point, I think I was humming Eye of the Tiger. And every time it hit a crescendo, I would poke her in the stomach. And I was just holding the toothbrush, not brushing her teeth. She's waiting for me to brush her teeth. She's a captive audience. She can't leave, right? And I'm just poking her and singing a silly song, and she thought it was the funniest thing ever.
Perfect.
So she was in that moment, right? Pure
Now,
joy.
just think of like that moment of pure joy that your kids have. Like, think of how often do we as adults have those moments of pure joy? It's not very common for most people, if we're being honest, right? If I'm being honest with myself, it's like most days it's a slog, it's a fight. I've got a mountain of to-dos, I've got deadlines, I've got all these things, and that's only if everything goes perfectly and there's no surprises. For most adults, life is a burden. And to have that level of joy, of contentment, of excitement, as your daughter did in that moment, is pretty rare. And it's because we as adults have taken on all these burdens of the world as we've grown up and realize, oh man, like I got to do all this stuff. I got to be successful. I got to grow businesses. And we get fixated on these things and we take on more and more of the world, and it becomes more and more of a burden. And it's like the more you pursue happiness in the form of success or business, the more elusive it gets. Unless you become like a child and surrender those things, surrender the world, and even enter into the presence of a being who loves you and enjoys you unconditionally and has fun, is silly, it has just as much of a sense of humor as you and I do, if not more. You know, in those moments, we can have that pure joy again, but we got to enter into it.
I think the fear, and it took me years to get through this. I don't believe it anymore, but the fear is if we surrender everything to God, He's going to take it all away and make us be a missionary in some country we don't want to be in. And it's going to suck, you know? And, you know, I realized how many like false beliefs are in that. But I think that's a fear a lot of people have.
Yeah, totally. Well, I think it is a fear, and I think it comes from the author of Lies, who likes to twist the truth. And so I think the truth, yes, is that there's going to be hard things in life. I think, yes, we will be called to die to ourselves and not live for the desires of our flesh, 100%. But I think at the end of the day, God wants what's best for us. That's also very clear in Scripture. But more than that, like, He is the author of love, the author of joy. I mean, Scripture even says that He is love itself. And so what He wants is us to have a maximum amount of joy, of peace, of love, of all the fruit of the Spirit in our lives. And He wants that wherever we go, whatever context, whatever season. And He is going to be partnered with us to pursue those things, not just in heaven or in my heaven time, but in every circumstance of life. He wants us to bring heaven to earth, right? And that's what it looks like. It's not just like heaven coming to earth is not this like drudgery where I got to do this checklist. And if I don't do this checklist, then I'm not going to be worthy or whatever, right? That's kind of how I used to live. It's I'll live on purpose in the pursuit of joy. And for me, it just so happens that my maximum joy comes from the Lord, and I get to overflow that with the people around me. And sometimes that joy fills me up and excites me so much that I want to go to really hard, dangerous places to also share that joy. But it's always based on joy. And if I'm going to go to the hard place, a difficult place, it's not going to be because I don't want to go. It's because I have so much joy that I can't wait to go. It could be I have so much joy that I can't wait to grow this business and use it as a vehicle for the kingdom.
Well, it makes sense, Eric. Well, hey, I have to wake up in 6 hours, and you actually answered without even me asking them. You've answered like all my questions on this list.
Keep going.
And I feel like
Send more.
I'm like, what's the point of interviewing people after this if I feel like your answers have been the best?
I don't know about that. I'll say that for those listening, don't take my word for it. Try it for yourselves and see if what I'm saying holds true. I would say if anyone practices prioritizing Jesus first truly in their heart and puts that before their business, even their family, and then family second, and doesn't see the fruit of that in a positive way, then I don't know, reach out to me and talk about it.
Send you a glitter
right.
letter.
I'll give you your money back.
Well, let's talk about how people can get a hold of you, and let's give you an opportunity to plug any projects you're working on.
Yeah, sure. So I've got this kind of new-ish nonprofit. It's called the Kingdom Movers Mastermind. And basically this is more or less my more specific end state in this life is I want to partner with other people who want to see the kingdom advanced and have shown the propensity to actually pursue it. And so the idea is we want to bring people together. They can be entrepreneurs, they can be pastors, they can be leaders, they can be whatever the case is, but they can be stay-at-home moms. But ideally, there's some sort of attempt in the past to try to multiply the kingdom in some way, shape, or form, kind of like in a more innovative way, ideally. And so it kind of caters more towards like entrepreneurial type spirits, to be honest. But people who see where there's a gap in the kingdom, or people that don't understand the joy that we have and want to go fill that gap, want to fix that problem, and have tried in some way, shape, or form. And so bring these people together and we basically mastermind. We basically come together and we talk about, we go through a process where we try to hone who are you, what have you been called to, what is the vision that God's given you. Let's solidify that, put it in stone, and then let's start actually building a business model or a plan, if you will, around that, and then let's mastermind that. Let's see how we can get you from here to there. And so we come together, and usually, I mean, we've done it one time and it was a huge success, but there were, pastors there, entrepreneurs there, military leaders there, trainers, physical trainers, like the gambit, teachers, and it was awesome. So I just want to invite anyone who feels like, like you've been called to do more with your life than just make money or build a business or do real estate, but you want to see the kingdom advanced in a new way or a fresh way or a way in which the kingdom's not currently advancing, and you've been trying, but you could use a little help, then please reach out and we would love to interview you. There is an interviewing process, and then we try to select it down to like a small cohort of about maybe like 10 people for that mastermind. So it's called...
And how do they
again, it's kind of fledgling, it's kind of new, so they can email Kingdom Movers Mastermind, all one word basically, at gmail.com. And movers is plural, Kingdom Movers Mastermind. And then they can also text, what's the number? I've got a Google Voice number basically set up for it. One moment. It is 719-377-2333. And yeah, love to connect and do a Zoom call or in person if it's possible. And again, we just want to see the kingdom multiplied in all sorts of different spheres and ways. And it's really cool. It's really exciting, the things that come from that. Yeah, we'll love to hear from folks.
If they join, do they start becoming really buff like you?
We can mastermind it. It's certainly a possibility. I'm not that buff, but we can come up with a plan for it.
Much buffer than me, my friend. Well, thank you, Eric. Appreciate your time. I know you're very busy over there.
Yeah, likewise.
Yeah, until next time.
This is great. Appreciate it, Drew. It was an honor. It was a pleasure. Keep getting after it, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks, Eric. All right, that's it for today. I hope this conversation got you thinking and maybe even questioning a few things. And that's the point. This isn't about having all the answers. It's about figuring it out together. If this episode resonated with you, share it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you want to keep exploring these ideas, make sure to subscribe and follow me over at theothersideofenough.com. Let's keep the conversation going and see you next time.